Welcome everybody to Kirby Connects. I hope you're having a great week. I hope that you are enjoying reading the Bible. We are week 18 as we're trudging, that's not a good word to use, as we are cruising through reading the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
And I love reading the
Delightfully
Bible
cruising.
side by side
Good.
with Psalms and parallel passages. Man, it helps me so much. And I've even enjoyed listening to it. You know, the Jews in the Old Testament, it was an oral tradition.
Yep.
A lot of illiteracy there. They could not, a lot of people couldn't read. And so they had to hear the stories over and over again. And so that's what I've been doing and trying to comprehend, to grasp as they would in the Old Testament. And so I'm enjoying it. So today we start with a real simple story of kindness and devotion between King David and Barzillai. We have a couple of different options roaming around the room on how to say it.
They're all good.
But the point is that he showed kindness to King David. David wanted to show kindness to him in return. Come go with me to Jerusalem and I'll take care of you. And he says, but I'm old. And it sounds like he's got one foot in the grave.
Really does. Very low quality of life.
And I'm sure his life was better than that.
I don't know.
But,
Can't taste that.
Doesn't really say that. Yeah.
You say that.
There's not a lot of highlights.
You're
just complaining about eating cold food.
But he did hear the king well enough to say, go with me to Jerusalem.
True.
He did.
He did think quick enough to say, hey, don't bless me. He realized he was old, not long for this earth. But he said, take my son and bless him instead. So, he's not as one foot in the grave as it might appear, but the majority of his life has passed, him by. He probably lived, the average age is probably, I don't know, I'm just going to make something up, but I don't remember what it is. Old is
Probably
good.
76,
Old is
80.
good. But it's a simple act of kindness there. Then we're in the second of the two revolts against David. One was with Absalom, his son.
Yep.
And who wants to run with that story, just real quick?
With Absalom?
Yeah,
Absalom was Sheba.
with Absalom first.
Okay.
Let's just, so we can
Step
get
back
to
to last.
Sheba. Yeah,
Yeah.
just kind of.
Absalom was one of David's sons who was for years kind of going around to different people in the kingdom of Israel and seemingly being a very skilled politician, giving them what they want, making promises, pointing out his father David's flaws. And then when the time comes, he anoints himself king, which is super weird just even to think about. Like somebody, he stood there amongst everybody and just said, I'm the king now. And that was good enough for a lot of people.
For a few people.
And so,
Yeah.
right, for at least for some people that followed
Some
him.
it was.
David goes and instead of immediately quelling the rebellion, runs away with some of his most skilled and close warriors until for a period of time, then they come back and Absalom is dead and David retakes the throne and is the unified, I like the way you said it, the unified king over a divided kingdom.
And so the whole deal with Absalom, that spans a space of 4 years. Well, even longer than that. But he was away from Dad, and then it was this ongoing just back and forth between David and Absalom before he finally dies. But then you have this guy named Sheba.
Yeah.
And I love the way he's introduced to us. There just happened to be a troublemaker.
A troublemaker.
Well, you know what? There's a lot of troublemakers everywhere, but this one just happened to be, and his name was Sheba, of the tribe of Benjamin. Again, Benjamin just kind of keeps coming up as this kind of like, tribe that couldn't get along, couldn't play well with others. And he blew his horn. I love what he does. Down! He calls, men together, and I don't think the whole town came to him, but he says, down with the dynasty of David. We have no interest in the son of Jesse. Come on, you men of Israel, back to your homes. So all the men of Israel deserted David.
Well, that's so curious, so the guy gets up and he's known as a troublemaker and he makes a statement. That's not curious, but what's curious, so all the men of Israel deserted David and followed Sheba. Like, there had to be something leading
Why
up
did
to
they
that.
follow
They
him?
didn't
That
just.
was my question.
Yeah, they didn't just all of a sudden go, "Hey, that sounds good."
If your reputation is you're a troublemaker,
Yeah,
and then if I'm hanging out with, if I'm following you, then I'm headed to trouble.
Right.
right.
Sure,
You know
it
what
would
I'm
seem that
saying?
way. Yep.
Yeah,
And so I don't necessarily have an answer for that either. It's just like, why would they follow him? I don't know if there's something in humanity that always thinks new is better. David's on a throne, a man after God's own heart. He's not perfect. We talked about that last week. But he had a heart to, when sin was confronted, he repented. And so here's Sheba just making waves and causing problems. And everybody goes, okay,
yeah.
well, we're done with David. Let's wash our hands of David. And now we're on to the next thing.
And I wonder if it went to the point where Judah first crowns David as king. 3 years, right? And then Israel is not there. Was that discontent there all along? Like, oh, he belongs to Judah. He doesn't belong to us. He represents them. He doesn't represent us. And they just had this undercurrent of that going in. And it was easy to kind of pour into that moment. That there was just strife underneath the scenes all the time. Because it took them, 3.5 years for Israel to say, yeah, we'll let him be our king too. There had to be some feelings on Judah's side and on Israel's side about their history.
And so it's interesting too. He said all the men.
Yeah.
See that? All the men. And we have to remember that in our culture, language tends to be literal unless the metaphors or the similes and those things are obvious. Well, the Hebrew language is not a literal language per se.
Right.
So when he says all, it doesn't mean every last and single one of them. Because you find that, David still has his army.
Right.
Yep.
And there's people that still follow after him. And so it doesn't mean that the Bible is wrong or ignorant. It's just translating something from one language to another is a sophisticated thing. Translating from something from one language to another language that is culturally different is even more sophisticated.
Absolutely.
And then you put time between that and present day, it even becomes more sophisticated. So the Bible isn't incorrect. The Bible is not full of lies. It's just Hebrew is a different emphasis. It's kind of like in Brazil.
Right.
All right. If you go to church, they'll say church starts at 7:30. Well, that's the time they say.
Yeah.
The fact of
Or
the matter
8,
is, it
8:15.
doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't start until everybody gets there.
That's for sure.
And so they say it starts here, but in fact, it may start at 8:15, 8:30, 8:45. And just go on and on. Now, there's this interesting backstory here that you just kind of see. And I don't know why it fascinates me, but it does. David sends Amasa to go, squash this thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he's partial to the troublemaker,
Right.
Sheba, but he just kind of is slow and, getting to it.
Yeah.
And so then David says Abanshi to go in his place, and Joab, who's kind of lost his position a bit, is now kind of sees an opportunity to get back in good with David, and he kills Amasa, and to get his position back as the chief of David's army. And that whole backstop started because a troublemaker, said, down with David. We're done with David's family, and it just has repercussions. Basically, the point I want to make through all of that is words matter. Words matter. What you say to your child in a moment of anger may come out years and years and years later and hurt someone else.
Yeah.
Words matter and they have consequences.
Well, even in the story, we see the opposite is true too. Like with the wise woman that kills him, like her words of wisdom to the people turn them against Sheba. That eventually is what really quells it. Like it's not Joab or anything else. It's the words of this unnamed wise woman whose words really do turn the hearts of the people.
Yeah.
And as quick as they were to follow him, they were just as quick to throw him under the bus. Like, oh, you just want him? Oh, yeah, sweet. We'll give him. Yeah, we're great.
There he
Don't
is.
attack us.
You won't destroy everybody went, thank you.
Crowd's turn.
Pointed right there.
That's the one.
quick.
Yeah. And I love Psalm 7 because it was written in this time when somebody was saying slanderous and unkind things against David. And we've all kind of felt that way. And we always wonder, does anybody else feel that way? And read Psalm 7. You know, I come to you for protection, O Lord, my God. Save me from your persecutors. Rescue me. If you don't, then they'll maul me like a lion, tear me down, O Lord, my God. If I have done wrong or if I'm guilty of innocence, blah, 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 blah. And then arise, O Lord, stand up against them, rule over them from on high. And it's just this, and it ends with this kind of, I will thank the Lord because he is just, and I will sing praise to the name of the Lord Most High. And so David, and I love the Psalms because they're written in real time in his life. They're set to music. They should be sung. And it was just really, really, really cool. So now we enter the latter years of David's life. And again, he goes on this conquest where he defeats the Gibeonites, the Philistines. Oh, I thought we had already taken care of the Philistines.
You got 6-fingered
They're
dudes.
Oh, yeah.
6-fingered,
Goliath's
6-toed.
brother.
They're back with more digits. Yeah, they're back with
24
more
in all.
digits.
It's,
Oh, yeah.
it's,
They can count very high.
24 in all. These
Yeah.
big descendants of the giants.
Yeah, and so what all that means, I don't know, but
They were big.
they battled
Dudes.
them
They fell.
again. By the way, in 2 Samuel 21:15, it says, once again the Philistines were at war with Israel, and David came, and his men were in the thick of battle, and David became weak and exhausted, and then Ishbi-Benob was a descendant of the giants. His bronze spearhead weighed more than 7 pounds, not quite as big as Goliath's, and he was armed with a new sword, and he cornered David and was about to kill him. But Abashi, son of Zeruiah, came and rescued him, and they killed the Philistines. And then this is when they said, hey, listen, king, you're not going to come to battle with us anymore. It's too dangerous for you. And and the kings always led the battle. The generals were the ones out front. And this was kind of like a real big positional switch after this. And then you have a couple other psalms. He sings a song in 2 Samuel 22. And then ties it in with Psalm 18. And I love how it just flows. And you read it and you go, well, yeah, I do see how they, coming out of that story, how they connect and how it makes sense. And I love reading it together.
Brings new light to the Psalms, reading it.
It does.
In
and
context,
really does.
realizing, oh, this is what he was going
Yeah.
through. This is
Yeah.
what was
It
taking
does
place.
helps it make more sense.
It does, because remember last year, Clayton was our wisdom
He
wit
was.
guy, and so he was doing Proverbs and Psalms, and it was just like, okay, today here's what we read, but now
Yeah.
you've got it set in a
In the
contextual
context,
setting,
absolutely.
and boom, it just comes to life. I agree with you 100%. Well, David had two big, huge sins. With one was Bathsheba that we've already talked about. With Bathsheba, we know of one person died. There were probably other men as David's army pulled back and Uriah, died in the heat of the battle. But
Right.
this sin that nobody hardly ever talks about, 70,000 people died.
Yeah.
70,000 people died. And it's interesting because the language is a little tricky.
Yes, it is.
And we're gonna talk about that, but it's the sin of David's pride.
Yeah.
And it all centers around a census. And basically David wanted to count his fighting men. And so
The easiest, like picking the easiest fruit out of this, because there is some complex fruit in these verses. The easiest part is why is he not supposed to take a census? Only God takes a census because the people belong to God. They don't belong to David.
Right.
So it's not the king. The king isn't to take a census. He's taking a census of things that don't belong to him. God, they belong to God. So that's at the heart of that. That's the easiest part to understand. But I'll just throw out there, I think this, as difficult as this passage is, it is so necessary because there's a principle of Bible study underneath this that says when you see things that on the surface contradict, stop and study it. Dig into it deeper. when you dig into things and you look at them at a deeper level, it will resolve things that on the surface may appear to be a contradiction because we don't know the culture, because we're not speaking in the original language, a lot of the things that Pastor Mike talked about. So just don't be afraid of them. Face them head on and keep digging until you find out what it is. It's a good time to go to some commentaries, look and see what different people have to say.
So
Yeah.
since you're there, tell us the conflict.
Yeah.
And tell us when you dug in what you.
So here.
And everybody can chip in here. I mean,
Absolutely,
it's-
please do, because there are so many places in the Bible where it's not like this is what it means. No, here are 3 things that it could possibly mean. But the conflict between the two verses, seeming conflict, is between 2 Samuel 24:1 that says, "Once again the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he caused David to harm them by taking a census." That's the first one. Parallel passage, 1 Chronicles 21, verse 1. Satan rose up against Israel and caused David to take a census of the people of Israel. So if you're just reading that at 100 miles an hour, you're like, well, wait a minute, there's a conflict here. Like the one book says that God caused David to do this. And the other one says that Satan rose up against him. I just want to throw it out there and then have you guys put some limbs on this tree. But we talked about this maybe a couple of podcasts ago about how can it be? It can be both, right? It can be God and it can be Satan. God had a plan. He was unhappy with the nation of Israel and that they needed to undergo discipline. God allowed, this is one take on this, God allowed the devil to tempt David to take a census in order to fulfill God's plan of disciplining Israel. So is it God? Is it Satan? It's God's plan. God uses the forces of evil to accomplish his plan sometimes. Really good example of that is Nebuchadnezzar. Mm-hmm. Nebuchadnezzar, not being a follower of the Most High God, and the Babylonians and the Assyrians, God used both forces of evil in order to discipline the nation of Israel. Was it God? Yes. Yeah. Was it Nebuchadnezzar? Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think to that, I agree with everything you're saying. Let me just take it one.
Yeah, because it's tough. There's a lot to it.
Yeah, one step, just not farther, but just to add to it. I think in this setting, and what David was about to do, God and Satan both had the same goal.
Okay.
God's goal was to expose David's prideful heart.
Okay.
Satan's goal, not knowing the future and not being able to read, but being a good judge of character, his heart. I think Satan's goal was to cause him to have a prideful heart.
Yeah, to exploit that.
Yeah, but both wanted to show his heart. God, so that he would confess the sin, right? Satan, so he would, ultimately break the Davidic covenant, which would break the lineage of Christ and the whole. What was coming.
Really good point.
So everything.
Yeah.
And you say, well, what do you mean? God and Satan have the same thing? Has that ever happened before? Well, remember Job. Comes into the Lord's presence and says, hey, the only reason this dude loves you is because you've blessed him with everything.
Yeah.
And God says, hey, take it all away. And again, Satan came at it from a negative point of view. I wanted to expose his heart. If you don't bless him, his heart will be exposed for what it truly is. God says, no, I want to reveal his heart to you because he truly is a follower. And so it happened there, the same thing. And I think it's not exactly the same thing, but I think it's very similar.
It's similar.
It would be a similar idea with God and the plan of redemption on the cross.
Yes.
Is that it's his plan of redemption, and it's Roman soldiers driving the nails through his hands that are bringing about that punishment upon the cross, that death on the cross. But it's God's ultimate plan of redemption, and so it's like they're going at it with two different ways. But God is sovereign and overall.
And that's a great example because Jesus even tells Pilate's kind of strutting his like, do you know who you're talking to? How much authority you have? And Jesus says, what? you only have the authority my Father
That
gives
God's
you
given
right
you.
now, because this is God's plan. You may have a role in it, but if you think you're on your own right now, you're not really.
Yeah.
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 Good.
But there's enough of this in here that I believe that David had a free will choice,
Oh yeah.
because he had to have a free will
He could've
choice.
said no.
Yeah, and God doesn't send punishment to people who don't have a free will choice.
Yeah.
And so there wouldn't be the three punishments to choose from, all of which bookend the whole passage, because it said that God's anger burned against Israel. The three punishments really are not about David personally, they're about the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel can have the plague, or they can have their enemies against them. So it kind of bookends that. But David did have a choice, and he knew it, and he repented in the middle of all this really hard to understand stuff. He says, basically, this is my fault. What? Don't take it out against the nation of Israel. This is my fault. I sinned. I chose to take a census. Very complex piece, but the more you look at it, it is not a contradiction.
Correct. Well, let's kind of wrap up quickly. The judgment for his sin, 70,000 guys die. David's heart gets softened, repents, and God withholds the anger from them. Then we find David and the idea, the concept of the building of the temple, and then David appoints temple leaders and then funds it. A little bit with taxation, but a lot with his own resources.
Yeah, his own wealth.
He was a wealthy guy.
Yeah.
His leaders.
And his leaders.
He asked the
Follow his
leaders. His
example.
leaders showed up huge.
Yes. Now,
It's
go ahead.
it's really cool. Just in what part is this? Sorry, chapter 22 of Chronicles. He's going through and I just quoted the wrong part. Don't listen to that scripture.
I'm looking for 23.
Sorry.
23.
29. First
29.
Chronicles 29.
29.
When he's talking about this, when he's doing the funding, he's asking people to follow his example in this. He's praising God in that, and he says, "Who are we even saying that we are giving this when it's you who've given this to us?
Yeah. I underlined that.
I think it's
Yeah.
so cool because that fits in our world today, whether it's financially, whether he's gifted us in different ways, spiritual gifts,
Yeah.
Yes.
abilities, whatever it may be. It's all been given to us by Him to be given back to
Yeah,
Him,
absolutely.
used for His
Yeah.
glory.
Even when we
see
sing
that here.
praise, we're doing it with the breath that
Absolutely.
He gives to us.
Yeah.
It's all originates from Him.
Yeah, I love that.
Let me just kind of throw this out there as we kind of wrap it up. So David, we see where he has the temple leaders, and it shows that worship and service to God has structure, it has excellence, and it has purpose.
Absolutely.
Sunday mornings don't just happen.
Yeah.
Look at all the people who are serving the administrative duties. You have supervisors, officers, judges, and public administrators. Ministerial duties, you have priests, prophets, assistants to the sacrifice, assistants for purification and ceremonies. Service duties, bakers of the sacred bed, those who check the weights and measures, caretakers. Financial duties, those who care for the treasures, those who care for the dedicated gifts. Artistic duties, musicians and singers. Protective duties, gatekeepers. Individual assignments, chief of gatekeepers, secretary, seer, prophet under the king, chief officer of the treasurers. Whew,
Yeah.
it takes a lot of people
Right.
to have church.
And then it
that's-
says, and they all served on a rotating basis.
Yeah.
They all served on a rotating basis as one would serve, the next would serve, the next would serve.
Could it be that every member of the Levi tribe was a minister?
Mhm.
And just like we say around here all the time. I mean, you say it a lot. How many people does it take to run an average
Oh, my
a
lands.
typical Sunday?
Yeah, it used to take about 48 to 50 when we first went into COVID. It's probably not less now.
Yeah.
So I would say, a fully stocked church is 50, 60 people who have given of their time, talents, and treasures and do it with excellence to be able to just make an hour of Sunday happen.
For God to get glory
Absolutely.
and the message to go forth and lives to be changed. What an honor to be a part of that. Guys, thanks so much. Thanks, Emery, for walking us through a tough passage. We'll see everybody Sunday.